Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our updated webinar on appraisal gaps and waivers. This is probably one of our most requested classes that we teach because we really go into the intricacies of how do appraisal gaps work, how can you get an appraisal waiver, and then designing clients' offers in a way that makes them stand out, right? Because there's a lot of overbidding happening, and we'll talk about that. So first thing I want to touch upon is just who we are. So we are the Turco team. We moved across country in January, and our team consists of a husband and wife partnership, myself and my wife Yasmin. If you Google us, I think we're up to like 170, 180 five-star reviews. And our role is to really just create an incredible experience for clients and really just guide them financially to making a good decision in their life. Now, within us taking lead in the advisory portion of the process, we have our teammate Candy who comes in and helps us with communications, getting pre-approvals done, and making sure clients have payment designs prior to going to look at properties. She'll also help us with disclosures and then keeping everyone up to date with what's going on in the process. And then in addition to Candy, we have two additional teammates. That would be Kelly and David. Kelly is our lead processor, and she's in charge of taking clients from contract to close. And Dave helps us with guideline challenges, HOA approvals, and he is a wizard at getting spot approvals done for VA and FHA. So let me get to the part that you guys really came from. So strategies for bridging the appraisal gap, right? So we're going to talk about how to craft a winning offer, and the whole design behind it is a marketing perspective. So we're going to market a client in the best light possible to make sure that they are the choice the seller makes without them having to spend the money that they're saying they're going to bridge. Okay? So we'll discuss the importance of a well-executed appraisal gap strategy, how to craft the winning offer without imposing a financial burden on our clients, and then as a listing agent, how to review offers when they have appraisal gaps written in the language, when you have concerns about someone really going over the top of what you listed for, what you see comps for, and trying how to dissect that and alleviate the risk of going under contract with the wrong person for your seller. Okay. So market dynamics that are going on today, it's still pretty challenging with inventory. I think it really depends. I'm getting word that there's a lot of condos for sale in like the Boston area, but when you get into the burbs, there's still like tremendous competition for single family housing and condo housing that's outside of the city. So home prices are continuing to rise. It's been relentless. It has not slowed down or stopped, even with rates hovering around 7 for the past almost 3 years now. And demand remains high. So this is the challenge. There is more people willing and able to make a move on acquiring a property than there are homes to choose from. So when our clients get into a competitive scenario, they are offering far above list price. And this is where the real concern about the home appraising or not, it needs to be taken into consideration. And on the list side, what happens? And as a buyer, how do you alleviate that risk to get your offer accepted? Okay. And the way we do that is by strategically crafting either a waiver into the offer or adding appraisal gap language that will provide some surety to the seller. Okay. So when we look at inventory year over year from April 24 to April 25, you can see like in our little pockets of like Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and I know there's agents from all over the country on this call. Our business is primarily localized, even though we can help in all 50 states. But in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, inventory is up 25%, 26 in New Hampshire, 28 in Massachusetts. Now, that seems like a big number, but it depends on what the inventory was in April of last year. So if we picked a town and April of 24, they had 10 listings, and April 25, we're up 25%. Well, there's only 13. So we're still challenged, even though it's slightly starting to improve year over year. Okay. So this means that clients are still competitively offering above asking. So what we need to do is help them craft a winning offer, and as a list agent, dissect the language within the offer. So what's the difference between an appraisal waiver and an appraisal gap? So an appraisal gap is when a client offers to cover a specific amount of above their offer. So if they're buying a home for 600,000, or it's listed, I'm sorry, it's listed for like 599, and they come in hot and they're like, I'm going to pay 7.25. They're $125,000 over asking. So significant concern that the property may or may not appraise at that, depending on how it was listed and what the comps show. So a client could say something like, hey, I will cover a gap of $75,000, meaning that the home only needs to appraise at 650. And if it appraises for less than that, there's concern. If it appraises for 651, client is still going to continue to purchase at that 7.25. So an appraisal gap can be used with any loan program. And the only way we would do this is if a client has at least 5 to or 7% down payment. And I'll explain why on other slides, but this can be used on conventional FHA, VA, and USDA programs. So an appraisal gap coverage, it allows an agent to make an addendum that states that if an appraisal comes in lower than the purchase price, the buyer is willing to cover the shortfall and continue with the contract. That shortfall could be the entire amount or a specified amount. And an example would be something like an addendum that says buyer will cover the difference of any shortfall in appraisal of up to 10,000, up to 30,000. So that's typically what we see our partners doing, is a specified amount, unless we're able to do an appraisal waiver. So an appraisal waiver is a completely different animal. So this can only be used on conventional mortgages. And that is because government mortgages like FHA, VA, and USDA have amendatory clauses that will kind of eliminate your ability to waive appraisals. Okay. The benefit of an appraisal waiver is that the appraisal requirement can be completely waived prior to making the offer. So we can investigate if we can waive it or not. This usually happens in situations where a client's making a down payment of 20% or more, and they typically need to have good to outstanding credit in order for this to be an option. Now, how do we know if this is an option? So lenders that kind of do a little bit more due diligence will run a client's profile through a program that is abbreviated on this slide as AUS. It stands for Automated Underwriting System. And when we type in a client's address, the address that they're looking to purchase, we have their full application and profile, and what their intended purchase price and down payment is, we run it through automated underwriting. And this is the system of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that will tell us if they're approved for a conventional mortgage or not. If they're approved, it gives us a list of conditions to satisfy. And then it also will tell us whether or not there is an appraisal required. So it's not the lender, it's not me, it's not cross country or the Turco team that determines whether or not an appraisal can be waived or not. It is the underwriting system of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. If they say they'll waive it, then we won't do it, because they're telling us that they will still buy the mortgage from us if we don't do an appraisal. So this waiver on the uncovering of the ability needs to be done by your lender prior to making the offer. They need to run automated underwriting with the address of the property they're intending to buy, with the design the client is intending to do financially. And it will tell us yes or no. And if we have a yes, it's good for 4 months. So it can go away, but it's unlikely that it goes away. Okay. So how do we take these two strategies, these two pieces of knowledge, and craft a competitive offer? So when it comes to constructing something that's compelling, it's crucial to focus on the collaboration between buyers, realtors, and lenders. we also want to take into consideration, what does a seller want? All a seller really wants is certainty that if they go under contract with somebody, that it's going to come to fruition as they accepted the offer. When it comes to dates, when it comes to the dollar amount they expect to walk away with, they just want the surest bet. Sometimes the highest offer wins, but good list agents will advise their client on the offer that is the highest, that also provides them with the most certainty. And this is where we run into like cash offers or beating financing offers. 20% down is more attractive than 5% down. And we need to help clients stand out when they make their offers. And as a list agent, you need to be able to dissect what the language means. Okay. So we really, really do need to work together to structure offers strategically. Okay. So the traditional ways to navigate low appraisals, there's various strategies out there when a buyer is faced with a low appraisal. The first one, I'm sure some of you have experience with, is filing an appeal through the lender. This is probably one of the most challenging things to accomplish. Have we done it successfully? Yes, but it's at a very small percentage, because an appraisal is truly the opinion of one person at one given moment in time. Yes, they have data behind it, but it's still an opinion. So we need to appeal that opinion and get the appraiser to admittedly think that they were wrong to raise or change the value. It is not a successful, highly successful method. It can be, but not as a high percentage. The second thing that a lot of people can do when there's a low appraisal is renegotiate the terms of the contract. Now, that is something that could be advantageous to a buyer. Hey, let's renegotiate to a lower sales price, and they benefit. From the seller's perspective, though, it's not a benefit. It's kind of going under contract with somebody that didn't come to fruition with the terms that they said. So a seller having to renegotiate sale price could potentially kill a deal, create a poor experience. And then when we think about the way our businesses grow, a client's experience is incredibly, incredibly important when it comes to the residual growth of your business. Sometimes you don't think about that, but it's true. Like, the reason why we focus on Google reviews and creating this wow experience is because it multiplies our success. Because if they feel like you didn't represent them to their best as a selling agent and they have to renegotiate terms, they might not recommend you to family and friends. But if you do protect them wisely, they're gonna promote you to the max, right? And then you're gonna be able to infiltrate their inner circle, their friends, family, and coworkers as well. Okay, so appraisal appeals, renegotiating terms, not the best way to go about things. The other way that we can do things is we can adjust down payment percentages, and then we can leverage appraisal gaps and clauses that are in the contract. So let's go through some real numbers. This one might make a little sense. And I promise you guys that we'll have a portion at the end where you guys can ask me any question that you want. I'll click back to the slides, but this one, if you can't follow along or there's any confusion, please just notate a question and we'll answer it. You can drop it in the chat or you can ask at the end. So the example that we're going to use is just flat numbers because it's easier for my brain. So it's a $500,000 purchase price, 20% down payment, and we're going to estimate $10,000 in closing funds needed. Okay. So when we do the math on that, 20% of 500 is $100,000. And then the 10,000 on top of that is 110,000. So the main things that we preach to clients is to focus on the majors of your financial decision. Okay. The rate being 20% or 4% or 7%, it's a factor. Don't get me wrong, it matters, but in the grand scheme of life, it doesn't truly matter, in my opinion. There's two major financial impacts when people make a purchase of an asset like a home. One is the cost of acquisition. So people plan on spending a specific amount of money to acquire the property. That cost of acquisition includes down payment and closing funds needed. The second major financial impact that they face is a change to their cash flow. So now when they buy this home, they're going to have this payment of repayment of the mortgage, taxes, insurance, potential HOA, and condo fee. So those are the majors in life. That is what you feel, and this is what we preach to clients to focus in on. Let's remember, this is how much it's going to cost to acquire the property, and this is your payment. That is all you feel in life. So those are the things that we want to try to maintain for a client. So if the $500,000 purchase appraises at $500,000, nothing changes for the client. Everything that they planned to do, which was spend $110,000 and take on a mortgage payment of $2,661, does not change. Okay, so this is our base example. So now we're going to jump to one where it does underappraise. Okay, so we have the same scenario, $500,000 purchase price, $10,000 in closing costs, and then a $50,000 gap in valuation. Okay, so when we look at what most people believe they have to do, and what what I would say is an inexperienced person in my role would believe a client has to do, is bridge that $50,000 gap. So what we do is we move the 20% down payment to be based upon the appraised value instead of the purchase price. Okay, so 20% of $450,000 is now $90,000. So now their new mortgage is $360,000. Their mortgage payment is going to go down. So it goes from $2,661 to $2,395. Their mortgage payment went down because they borrowed $40,000 less. They were originally planning to borrow $400,000. Now they're only borrowing $360,000. So their payment does go down. But we still have a gap in value of $450 to $500. So the client would bring an extra $50,000 to the table to bridge that gap. So if we're putting $90,000 down now, plus bridging the gap of 50, the client goes from spending 110 that they planned to 150,000. So that is 40K of unplanned expenses in the major financial impact of the cost of acquiring the property. So this is the standard thing that people think they have to do. This is the fear that clients have when we talk to them about appraisal gaps and waivers, is they think they need to come up with this money. And I'm going to show you a solution that allows them not to, okay? And that solution that most people in my role will jump to is to simply add PMI. So what they'll do is that they won't change anything. They'll do, still a $500,000 purchase price, $450,000 appraisal. New mortgage is $400,000. So that results in like 450 versus 400 is like a 8% down payment, something around there, 9% down payment. So the way we bridge that gap in value is by adding private mortgage insurance. So I'm sure many of you know what PMI is. You guys are all industry experts. The simplistic way that I explain it to clients is that it is an insurance policy on the percent of 20 that somebody does not put down. So if the new calculation is 9% down because of the gap in valuation, well, now we need an insurance policy for the other 11 so that they don't have to bring the cash to the table. So in this example of simply adding PMI on the right side, their cash to close does not change. They're still going to spend the $110,000 that they originally planned. So we maintained the cost of acquisition number, but the mortgage payment did go up by $83 a month, which was the cost of PMI. Now, PMI is super cheap if you have good credit. If you have mediocre credit, it gets a little bit more expensive. It's very similar to like car insurance. Clean driving record, no accidents, no tickets, for the cheapest you can get. Add a ticket to your record, gets more expensive. Add a couple accidents, gets more expensive as well. PMI is very similar based on the percent of 20 it needs to protect and the client's credit score. So $83 in unplanned monthly payment. Now, if somebody's buying at their high-end affordability, this could affect ratios, or it also could affect their budget. I always say to clients that if your financial budget is going to get blown up over $100, $150 per month, you're shopping too high. There are so many things in all of our lives that we can shave off to make this work. Okay. But these are like not even the best ways to go about it, right? So the one on the left, client brings a boatload of cash. The example on the right, client has to spend $83 more per month, potentially more if their credit score isn't strong. So let's go over some better financial solutions. And these are the intricacies that we go through with clients. So it still appraises low for $50,000. So we're using the same example, $500,000 purchase price, $10K in closing costs. There's a gap of $50,000 in the appraisal. The client is planning on spending $110,000 and only paying $2,661 per month. So the first option is to buy out PMI. So just like I used the example of car insurance, when you get a quote for car insurance, they tell you, hey, it'll be X number of dollars per month. If you would like to pay the whole year, we'll give you a little discount. So private mortgage insurance has that same design. So you can elect to take out private mortgage insurance in a monthly payment, or you can get a quote that allows you to buy it out entirely for a one-time cost. And it's typically very discounted versus the monthly aspect of it, right? So we would redesign this purchase to be a 10% down calculation. And the reason for that is because private mortgage insurance, like I said, it's based off of credit score and the amount that it has to protect. So it has little tiers. So 3% down, most expensive PMI. 5% gets better, 10 is cheaper. If you have a 15% down payment, it's covering less, it gets cheaper. So it tends to change the pricing scale in 5% increments. So we'd want to redesign the client's financial mortgage as a 10% down payment, okay? So 10% of the appraised value, okay? So the appraised value is $450, 10% is $45,000, okay? We still have a gap of 50, right? Which is the other aspect of it. And then the PMI, well, let me go back for a second. Excuse me for that. All right, so purchase price is 500, appraised value is 450. We redesigned the down payment to 10% down. So our new mortgage becomes 405, and the client spends the same exact amount of money. Now, let me go through the math that I just confused myself on, okay? So 450 to 405 is a $45,000 down payment. We have a $50,000 gap, which makes it $95,000 total now. We have $10,000 in closing costs estimated, so now we're at $105. So how does the client spend $110? We use that other $5,000 to buy out the PMI policy. So they have no monthly PMI. They still only spent a maximum of $110,000. Their payment does go up. Their payment went from $2,661 to $2,694. So it went up $33 per month. The only reason it went up is because we went from borrowing $400 to borrowing $405. So that $33 per month is because we're borrowing $5,000 more. So in this example versus the last two, client is still only bringing $110,000 to the table that they expected and planned to financially contribute, but their payment only went up $33 per month versus it potentially going up 80, 90, 110, depending on their credit score. So this design controls the fluctuation of their payment simply based upon how we move in the borrowing amount, and that's it. Okay. So then the other better financial solution is to buy out the PMI with the original loan amount. Okay. So a redesign to 10% versus a buyout with the original loan amount. Okay. So purchase price of 500, appraised for 450. Let's leave the mortgage alone at 400. the client doesn't want their payment to change. So the mortgage payment stays at $2,661. Now, their cash to close goes up to $115,000 because the difference between 500 and 400 is 100,000, 10,000 in closing costs, and an extra 5 to potentially up to that amount to buy out the PMI policy. So if a client offered a $50,000 appraisal gap on their offer, it would stand out to a seller if all things are similar. Similar offer price, no inspection, waiving contingencies. And one client offers, hey, I will provide you with surety by offering that I will cover a $50,000 gap in value. Now, to the client, to the seller, they're like, all right, this is awesome. Like, we have a 50K window in case this under appraises because there's so much competition on this house. But the buyer client will never, ever, ever, ever have to spend the $50,000. And in the worst case scenario, they either spend an extra 5 or they spend 0 extra and take on $33 per month. Okay. So this is something that does need to be strategized together prior to submitting the client's offer so that we can communicate how this works to a buyer. And as a seller agent, if you're one of my agents and you have a listing and you want me to, and you want help reviewing an offer that has this language, I'll help you dissect it on this end as well, right? So that you can read through the fluff, right? Because at the end of the day, that 50K gap offer is a marketing strategy to make the buyer stand out, knowing that they will never ever have to bring the money to the table, and they can still buy the house at the 500K price that they planned. Now, this is for your reference as to like how and when we're able to do this and how we determine this. Okay. So the minimum down payment for a first-time home buyer is 3%. If someone's buying a 2, 3, or 4 family, you can do 3.5 FHA or 5% conventional. If you're not a first-time home buyer buying a condo or a single family home, instead of a 3% minimum, the 5% is the minimum down payment. So we need a client to financially be able to make more than the minimum down payment. Okay. So if someone's a first-time home buyer and they can do 3%, but they can financially do 5%, but qualify at 3% down, that we can use that difference as an appraisal gap. So if someone's doing a 7% down payment, but they qualify at 5 financially, well, then we can use that extra 2% of the purchase price as appraisal gap coverage. Because we know if it under appraises by that 2%, we can just move the debt away from the down payment percentage and recraft it in the ways that I showed you. The larger the down payment the client financially intends to do from the start, the greater the gap coverage we can provide. So if somebody was like, hey, I want to make a 20% down payment no matter what, but when I look at numbers, they financially qualify to only make a 10% down payment. And when I say financially qualify, we're looking at debt ratios. Can they still buy this house at a 10% down payment, right? So what happens is we take that difference between the where they qualify versus where they want to be and talk to them about offering that as an appraisal gap. So if someone is buying $1 million house, and there is a 10% appraisal gap, that means that you'd be willing to cover $100,000 short of a valuation. That is going to stand out as an offer. And then when we go through numbers with your client, they're going to know that they never actually have to come up with that money as a difference. We're just going to redesign everything to either minimally change their contribution by a few $1,000s or minimally change their payment by a small amount of money per month. So appraisal gap clauses or waivers, they strengthen offers in bidding wars. And I will share with you guys that out of nowhere, my wife Yasmin and I decided to go after buying another home. And this is in the same town that we live in. And it was listed at like $899, and the open house was like off the charts. A home priced at $899 in the town that I live in is like mind blowing, right? So it drew a lot of attention. The winning offer ended up being $1,012,000. So it's $112,000 over asking. And yes, we are the one that did win that offer. So we waived mortgage contingency. And that is because we pre-underwrote our own file. And we can talk about that one off, how we can eliminate mortgage contingencies for offers by having clients underwritten through the pre-approval process. So it strengthens their offer. And we also waived appraisal. We waived it all together. Because when we looked at comps, we were like, you know, if this place appraises for like 960, 970, like we know what to do. We know that we don't have to come up with the difference. So it made our offer stand out, and we beat a cash offer because of that. We beat a cash offer because we waived an appraisal, we waived a mortgage contingency. We don't need an inspection because we know the home. Now, is that the best advice for someone that's not as experienced in the business as myself and my wife? Maybe not, but through proper education to the client and helping them understand the risks behind what they're doing, and if it came into play, what would it look like financially? When they see that it's only a few $1,000s more out of pocket, when they see it's only $35 more per month, it goes like, it's like, oof, like, oh, okay, let me offer a 100K gap and make my appraisal, my offer stand out. Leo explained to me that I'll never have to spend that money. So this is where it strengthens a client's offer in a bidding war when all things are comparable. So this is the whole purpose of it. Provide a seller with the confidence that the deal will not fall through due to a low appraisal. So if you choose us, we're still going to buy the house if it underappraises based on the gap or the waiver altogether. So I want to thank you guys for attending. We kind of rolled that through that pretty quick. I usually average about 45 minutes, and we're going to have a nice window for questions and answers.